Welcome back to a new chapter of Always Mine by SamadiW. Before we start this chapter, I have to give out a little trigger warning, as in this chapter there will be mentions of sexual assault and harassment. If these topics are not for you, I will put a timestamp in the info box of the video where this scene starts and where it ends, so you can easily skip it when you get there. Please take care of yourself. And now, off to Chapter 9. A few weeks later. It was Luna's birthday, and everyone agreed to plan a party for her in the Gryffindor common room. Hermione looked forward to it. Draco raised his eyebrows and looked over his book to see her run around the dorm in a huff. He stifled a laugh when she stubbed her toe on the coffee table and cried out in pain. She hopped to her room, and he let out a low laugh at the hilarious sight. Oh, he was well aware of this so-called birthday party and was not thrilled about it. It would be another reason for Weasley to pressurize Hermione into having sex with him. Draco had their many arguments while sitting in his room or common room, and the red-headed man repulsed him. Why was the arsehole so desperate to get laid? Hermione did her hair in a high bun, allowing a few curls to adorn her face. The deep dress hugged her figure in the right places. Deciding that Ron's nagging about having sex was perhaps justified, she convinced herself she would give him what he eagerly wanted tonight. She selected her lingerie with care to match the dress. The bra was red lace, with a red lace thong to match. It was unlike her usual selection of cotton knickers, and whatever bra was washed. What she wore was sexy for sure, and Ron would love it. She felt incredibly nervous. Her head throbbed with uncertainty. Was this really what she wanted? A certain platinum blonde crept into her mind. Walking back to her bedroom, she sat on the bed, trying to fasten the tiny buckle of her high-heeled shoe. She got to her feet, twirled in front of the mirror, and winked at her reflection in satisfaction. Closing the door to her room, with a present in hand, she turned to leave and crashed into Draco. Her heel twisted under her, and he grabbed her before she fell on her arse. Her fingers ran over his toned muscles through the white t-shirt he wore. He felt his muscles tense under her touch. He kept staring at her. She looked so incredibly sexy. A deep sense of protectiveness grabbed hold of him. He had not kissed her since Christmas, and he was about done waiting. Pushing his witch up against the door, Draco kissed her hard. Did not care if she pushed him away. He needed this. He needed her. Hermione moaned into his mouth as his tongue sought hers. She held onto him for dear life. It was electrifying being in his arms. Moving her hands to the side of his hips, she held him to her and let her polished fingernails dig into the corners of his shirt. Draco put his arm around her waist, pulled her closer to him, deepened the kiss, and moved to suckle on her neck. Granger would be his fucking undoing. He was sure of it. She felt his fingers move along her thigh, edging upward. He pushed the thong aside and stood a finger inside her, gathering wetness. Her breathing hastened as he massaged the bundle of nerves that awakened to his touch. Her body betrayed her mercilessly. Draco urgently whispered between kisses, "Please don't go to him. I can't bear it anymore." He clamped her lips once again and pleaded, "Stay with me. I want you so much." In utter desperation to keep her by his side, he groaned into her ear painfully, "Please don't sleep with him, Hermione." She felt the heat rise and ecstasy take over at the fast movement of his fingers. Holding onto him, she came undone around his long finger. "Oh, Draco!" she cried, throwing her head back in pleasure. Once she was completely spent, he withdrew and licked each finger slowly, tasting her, savouring her. She tasted sweet and heavenly. Her eyes fluttered open. "I have to go, Draco." Anger and darkness flashed across his face. He punched the wall next to her face. His skin split and blood rushed to the surface. She quickly took his hand in hers, alarmed by what he had done. Touching her wand from the fallen purse, she muttered a spell and the bruising lessened and disappeared. They looked at each other intently before she left. Draco stared after her. His heart seemed to be breaking. Hermione rounded the corridor, leaned against the stone wall, and tried to calm her rapidly beating heart. The things he had said to her were selfless. He wanted her as she wanted him. It had taken time, but he had finally admitted it. Her heart sang its delight. She was going to end things with Ron tonight. Feeling light-headed, a big part of her wanted to turn around and run back to him, but her friends needed her, and she snapped back to her senses. Loud music and whistles greeted her as she entered the Gryffindor common room. The festivities were already in full swing. She quickly went in search of Ginny, Ron, and Harry. They huddled around a dazzling birthday cake, adding the last sparkling candles. Ron gave an appreciative look and pulled her close to him. She cringed, but he didn't seem to notice. "You look great, Hermione," Ginny said, swaying to the music. She took Ginny's hand and led her away from the festivities. "Ginny, you know I love you guys, right?" Hermione asked nervously. Confused, the redhead looked at her. "Of course I do, just as we love you." Hermione nodded. She needed to get it out of her system. "I'm going to break up with Ron." She flinched and braced herself, expecting the worst. Ginny grinned. "I'm honestly shocked that you haven't done it sooner. I love my brother, but Hermione, come on. He's a complete sodding asshole as a boyfriend." They hugged and she continued. "This changes nothing between Harry or us. He will be slightly disappointed, but you know him. He's too rational for his good." Hermione wanted to cry. She hugged Ginny tightly. All she had to do now was tell them she was falling in love with Draco Malfoy. Baby steps, Hermione. Baby steps. It was time to cut the cake, and happy birthday choruses rang throughout the Gryffindor common room. Luna stood before the cake with a big, bright smile, blowing out the candles and cutting the cake. Ron snaked his hand around Hermione's waist, planted a sloppy kiss on her cheek, and whispered huskily, "We shall wear out fair." Hermione smiled confidently and stepped away from his sword. "That would be good, Ron. We need to talk." He winked and flashed his boyish grin because he clearly thought he was getting lucky. They agreed to meet outside the common room in half an hour. Bottles of fire whiskey and butterbeer were arranged on the table with food next to it. Luna was so kind to the house elves. They had gone out of their way to create a delicious feast before them. Draco sat on the bed with his head in his hands. Was she with him? Was he touching her? He threw the lamp across the room. It shattered and fell into pieces. Against the odds, he was forced to admit he had strong feelings for the bloody know-it-all. Everything was different with Granger. Even something as simple as a kiss, and he had kissed more than a few people's share of girls in his time. Her soft skin, ruby lips, laughter, and the way she remembered key phrases from the books she read. She was in his head, tormenting him with her touches, laugh, and sweet voice. Hermione had a few drinks, but everyone around her was drunk. Ginny's tolerance for alcohol was admirable, but even she was weakening. She indulged in a heavy make-out session with Harry in the common room. Hermione chuckled and said to Luna, "I hope you're having a good time." The mystical blonde smiled. "I am having a wonderful time, thank you." Without skipping a beat, Luna added, "Tell Draco I said hello." Luna never ceased to surprise her. It was almost time to meet Ron. She excused herself and made her way to the portrait, carrying her heels. She was tired but excited at what the rest of the night entailed. She wanted to see him, be with him. It was as simple as that. Sighing to herself, Hermione dreaded the upcoming confrontation with Ron. Before, her boyfriend, he was her best friend, but she did not love him like she was meant to. The moment she stepped out of the common room, a large hand grabbed her. She smelled the heavy stench of fire whiskey, and it instantly turned her off. A little she could handle, but Ron smelled like a brewery. It was repulsive and made her stomach churn unpleasantly. Ron slurred.
"Pussycat, where are you off to, then?"
His grip tightened around her waist. Hermione tried to wriggle free, but he was not budging. She tried to push him away and said sternly, "I'm so tired, Ron. I thought of heading back to my dorm." Judging by his state, their talk would have to wait for sober times.
"That's great. I thought tonight we could take this relationship to the next level. Come on, Hermione. We have been together for a while now."
Tried to convince her while keeping up with her hurried strides.
"Don't you trust me?"
he managed to say after a hiccup. Ron's recent behavior completely put her off him. Sex was all he ever spoke about, and she had considered giving herself to him tonight in a moment of weakness, but that was before Draco kissed her senseless and confessed what he truly felt. There was no going back to him after that. Besides, she caught him flirting mercilessly with his ex-girlfriend Lavender Brown, who laughed and battered her eyelashes at every stupid thing he said. It didn't upset her, it merely amused her and gave her another reason to get out of the relationship. Hermione tried to push him back and said sternly, "No, Ron, stop. We need to talk. This is not working out. We need to take a step back." His fingers closed around her arm, and he raged.
"Or are you breaking up with me?"
She stood her ground and looked at him defiantly. His fingers dug into her skin painfully.
"You fucking cocktease!"
Ron did not let her go. His hold tightened, and he forcefully backed her into an empty classroom nearby. Alarm bells started going off in her head, and her wand was in her purse. Hermione pushed him roughly, but he slammed her against the wall and tried to kiss her mouth. He attacked her neck with unwanted wet kisses when she turned her head away. She gasped in disgust while struggling against him. Her eyes filled with tears as she tried to push him away and pleaded with him to stop. Ron was completely intoxicated and paid no attention to a word she was saying. He grunted, hurriedly moving his hand towards her breasts. Minutes passed, and Hermione went numb. A single tear slid down her cheek. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Draco, I'm sorry." A figure stepped out of the shadows.
"Get away from her, you weasel shit!"
A deadly voice warned. Hermione sighed in relief as Draco came into view. He looked beyond furious. Ron still wouldn't let her go. He turned to face Slytherin and hissed,
"This doesn't concern you, Death Eater."
Draco took out his wand, narrowed his eyes, and growled,
"See? That's where you're wrong, Weasley. Everything about her concerns me."
He pointed his wand directly at Ron and warned,
"You have till the count of 5 to release her. And if I..."
Ron's sentence was cut off. He flew across the room and hit the empty desk with a loud thud. Hermione stared at Draco, transfixed, frozen to the spot. She stared at him unblinkingly. His eyes were almost a clear grey as he hexed Ron, and without another word he hurriedly ran over to his witch and cupped her face to see if she was okay. Satisfied, he took her trembling hand in his, and they left the dark and dingy room. Hermione glanced over her shoulder at Ron. He got to his feet, rubbing his hand and arm. She could see the puddle of blood on the floor. She threw him a look of pure disgust while he angrily watched her leave with Draco. They hurried their step before anyone else crossed their path. Draco only let go of Hermione's hand once they were in the safety of their head dorms. Placed Luna's gift on a small kitchen counter they shared. Hermione stared at the gift. He followed her gaze. He cleared his throat.
"You, dropped it earlier, so I thought of bringing it to you."
He added angrily,
"Bloody good thing I did."
He had rounded the corner just in time to see Weasley drag Hermione into an empty classroom while she tried to wriggle free. In all his life he hadn't felt that much rage. It was the one time he had been tempted to use an unforgivable curse. She was reticent. He looked at her, trying to read her thoughts. Hermione winced as she rubbed her arm where Ron's fingers had dug in and held her. Draco closed the distance between them and gently took her arm. The area was bruised, and a dark purple mark was beginning to show. His fingers on her were welcome. He touched the area and felt her goosebumps rise.
Weasley is a fucking class act. I do not know what the fuck you've seen him, Granger.
Draco spat out in contempt. She didn't know either. It hardly mattered anymore. Whatever she had with Ron was over and done. Hermione turned her head to the side and groaned in pain. Draco saw another purpling bruise on her neck where Ron had slammed her into the wall. Anger surged through him once again. He wished he had put Weasley in the hospital wing. On impulse, he bent down and lightly kissed the bruise. She closed her eyes, and a soft moan escaped her lips. She leaned into him as he tread kisses down her neck and ran her fingers through his fine, silky hair. Draco picked her up ever so slowly. She felt so light in his arms. He took her into his room and let her down gently on his bed. Their need for each other was urgent. He crushed his lips against hers, and she rushed to meet his intensity. They craved this, and before they knew it, they were clawing at each other in eagerness to become one. Hermione slipped her fingers underneath his t-shirt and pulled it slowly over his head, fingers trembling as she touched the trained Slytherin. He was impressive, so taunt and hard, the body of a seeker. Draco turned her round and slowly undid the zip that held her dress together. He placed light kisses on the back of her neck. She leaned into him enthusiastically, not wanting to miss a single touch. The dress fell at her feet, and she delicately stepped out of it and turned to face him. The burning fire she possessed returned. He could see the desire burning within her, and he swallowed. She was breathtaking. Why had he never noticed her curves, lips, and infectious smile? Nothing about Hermione Granger was ordinary. She leaned against his chest and kissed him passionately. She ran her tongue along his bottom lip and bit down before deepening the kiss. His tongue met hers in fury, abandonment. Her fingers played with the buttons of his trousers, slowly undoing each one. It fell to the ground. He wore nothing else. Hermione felt his erect shaft under her fingertips. It throbbed as she touched it, and he let out a low moan. She kissed his taut body until she was on her knees. She bit down her lips, and her fingers closed around his shaft. Draco yielded to her every whim, every touch. Hermione leaned forward and licked his throbbing manhood. He drowned in his desire. An involuntary growl left his lips. A bolt of electricity shot through him as she took him in her mouth, moving her tongue along his length. She tightened her lips around it and began to suck rhythmically. Merlin, if she kept this up, he would release it all over her face. It took all his willpower to reach for her and pull her up. He let go reluctantly as his lips clamped hers once again. Still locked in a fiery kiss, he gently laid her down on the bed, his hands and his lips leaving no area untouched. She felt his hard member pressing against her thigh. She whimpered as the sheets molded themselves to her body. It felt luxurious against her skin. She had not expected anything less. Draco Malfoy always had class. His voice seemed like in a dream.
Granger, are you sure you want this? Because once we start, there will be no going back.
She replied by reaching back and unhooking the silky red bra she wore. Draco groaned, watching in fascination at the rise and fall of her supple breasts. He had to consent he so ardently needed. Hermione rested back against the sheets. He felt her fingers tighten in his hair as he kissed down her flat stomach. He lingered, just savouring the taste of her. She was so smooth. Her skin was like silk in his mouth. He slowly continued, enticingly sucking on her flesh as his hand snaked between her legs. He felt her most sensitive part through the silk knickers she wore. Even with his experience, his fingers trembled as he touched her core.
"Granger, you're dripping,"
Draco whispered between kisses, and Hermione sighed in response. He pushed her farther up the bed and positioned himself near her entrance. Using his thumb, he shimmied the soaked underwear down her legs and threw it on the ground. His erection strained against the silk sheet, but it wasn't about him. It was all about her, and Draco wanted to make her feel good. Moments later, his mouth touched the inner sides of her leg, licking and softly biting along one thigh, only to turn to the other and give it the sweet attention it deserved. Slowly parted her thighs and ran his tongue along her slit. She gasped out loud, and her eyes flew open. With mind-blowing accuracy, his tongue made small circles inside her, and when he sucked on her, he knew she was wet enough to accommodate him. Swiftly moving to the top, he kissed her full on the mouth. Hermione held on to Draco, and butterflies fluttered relentlessly inside her. She closed her eyes and gave herself to what would come next. She was a virgin. He knew this. It was paramount that he was as gentle as possible with her. For once in his life, he felt the mounting pressure.
"I won't hurt you. You look so beautiful,"
he whispered against the corner of her mouth. He cupped her cheek and instructed reassuringly.
"Hold on to me tight, and if it hurts you, you need to stop me. Do you understand, Granger?"
If anything surprised her that night, it was his words. He seemed so genuinely protective of her, it made her want him even more. She muttered, not trusting her voice. Draco placed himself at her entrance and pushed her in. His breath came out in a low groan as he felt a barrier breaking, and she dug her nails into his back. He walked slowly back and forth, letting her tight walls adjust to his presence as he filled her with more of himself. Hermione felt delicious pain, every hot, unrelenting inch of him, as he pressed deep inside her. She felt him study her face. He was looking to see if she was okay. Smiling, she again claimed his lips and began moving against his hips. She wanted him, all of him. He met her movements with deep thrusts as he built up a nice, smooth rhythm. "You feel so good, darling," she told him repeatedly. She squirmed under him, and he knew she was close to her release. Granger made love to him like no other woman ever had. It excited and scared him at the same time. Drake wanted to feel her explode around him. He sped up his movements, and her hips moved to match his. This woman was born to be his. She moaned his name and came undone around him. Her release pushed him over the edge, and he followed shortly with a loud groan, spilling all he had deep within her. It was fucking mind-blowing. Hermione held Draco close to her body and whispered, "I've got you." He laid on top of her, letting her stroke his back and run her fingers through his hair before slowly moving to the side. His vision blurred, a satisfied grin plastered on his face, while she nervously fidgeted with the corner of the black sheet. Hermione knew his reputation and how every girl wanted him. Draco gathered her in his arms and kissed her neck.
"You feel so good." "It was quite unforgettable, Granger,"
he told her, gently kissing her forehead. He mused.
"You're going to be the death of me."
She smiled in relief. He could tell she was worried about her performance. How would he tell her that the supposed sex god of the school had his best sex with her? He swallowed his pride and confessed.
"Granger, this is the best I've ever had."
Her face lit up. She leaned over to kiss him lightly and tried to leave, but he held onto her wrist and pleaded.
"Stay tonight, Hermione. Please."
Hermione tried hard to conceal her amazement. From sharing the dorm with him, she knew as soon as the deed was done he kicked the others out, and many times she had witnessed bitter arguments between him and his so-called fuck buddies. She slid back under the sheets and into his waiting arms without hesitation. They were asleep before they knew it. To be continued. Thank you for listening to this chapter of Always Mine by SamadiW. If you'd like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, and AO3.